And welcome to the PFF DFS Chalk Talk podcast. I am your host, Scott Barrett, joined by DFS guru legend himself, Tyler Buecher. Tyler, how are you doing?
Scott, you're too kind. Excited to be here. Excited for week one to finally arrive. We've been waiting all off season, and now we can finally get down to it. We've got a full 15 games coming up. We're missing one, unfortunately.
15?
15, yes. We're missing this Miami-Tampa Bay game due to the Hurricane Irma going down there in Florida. Hopefully everyone's safe out there. But unfortunately, the NFL decided to move that to week 11. That being said, we're going to go ahead and give you our plays and strategies for week one. I'm excited. Let's get into it.
All right, let's do it. And let's start off with quarterback. I've heard some different names being touted as the chalk this week. And to me, it's a guy who hasn't gotten that much love, but is definitely deserving of it in the highest game total of the week, and that's Marcus Mariota. In DFS, we're typically, if you listen to our strategy podcast for cash or tournaments, we're usually talking about like different things that make a quarterback successful for fantasy. And in the case of Mariota, he has literally everything going for him. He's a home favorite. He's a high implied point total, high game total. He's the only favored by 1.5, which implies a shootout. He just upgraded his weaponry this offseason, adding Eric Decker, Corey Davis, Taywan Taylor. All three are touchdown machines. And another big thing is this secondary is really bad. So PFF's three worst rated cornerbacks this preseason were Oakland's Chris Humes, TJ Carey, and Sean Smith. Carey and Smith are going to be the starters in nickel package. And then fellow starter David Amerson ranked bottom 25 in fantasy points allowed on both a per target and per route basis last season. Oakland safeties graded out only average last season. And rookie Obi Melifonwu, it's a fun name to say, is out for week one. And their two starting linebackers rank as two of our 11 worst at the position and are especially bad in coverage. We've seen an immense ceiling from Mariota before. From weeks 5 through 11, he was fantasy's top scoring quarterback. He's probably more of a tournament play than a cash play, but I do like him in cash as well. As far as tournaments go, easily, I'd say, my top quarterback of the slate. I do like Derek Carr as well, especially because I feel like it's an easy stack to either or both of Crabtree or Cooper. What do you think about that, Tyler?
I think that's awesome. That was a lot of information on Mariota, but I couldn't agree more. I think that is going to be one of my most heavily stacked games. The Raiders and Titans, as you implied, have one of the highest game totals, and that's exactly what we're looking for in DFS. I think you nailed it right on the head there. I think Mariota could be in play for both cash and GPPs. He has that ceiling that you're looking for and that safety with his rushing. He warrants consideration for both, I think.
What quarterbacks are you on, Tyler?
Speaking of high game totals, I'm really into this Packers-Seahawks game. When we talked about this in our inaugural Week 1 pricing podcast, I mentioned that Aaron Rodgers was someone I was into, and that hasn't changed over the past month. Over the last 3 years, Rodgers leads all quarterbacks with multi-passing touchdown games at home. He's done so in 21 of 24 games. Rodgers just dominates at home, and he's got a nice upgrade to his receiving core this year with Martellus Bennett, who provides a nice red zone outlet. Rodgers averaged 27.3 DK points over his last 8 games of the season in 2016, and he's perfect for chasing upside at just 7K. Last time he faced Seattle, he was priced down at just 6.4K, so we aren't getting quite the bargain as we did last year, but he still threw for 3 touchdowns in that matchup and 21.2 points. That 21.2 points is exactly what we're looking for with our 3x value, and I think Rodgers is another great play to target. Ownership really doesn't matter for quarterbacks. there's just so many different ways to differentiate lineups that I don't think you need to be that cute in trying to figure out the ownership of different quarterbacks. But anytime we can get suppressed ownership on a guy like Aaron Rodgers, I think that's certainly worth gaining some exposure to.
Yeah, I think another perk with Rodgers, similar to Carr, is we should know who his best stacking options are going to be. And I think Devontae Adams is just going to get ignored on Richard Sherman's side of the field. Historically, Aaron Rodgers doesn't target elite cornerbacks, and throughout his career, it's like 120 attempts against Seattle, and only 3 or 4 were to receivers covered by Richard Sherman. So should see a big day coming for Randall Cobb and Jordy Nelson. I'm also on Russell Wilson as well. Green Bay allowed the second most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, but digging deeper into it, I don't know. I'm kind of coming off of it because Russell Wilson has 10 interceptions over his last 3 games against Green Bay, and this is a quarterback with one of the lowest interception rates in NFL history. What do you make of that, Tyler? Should I be concerned?
I think that's shocking. We've seen Russ be very productive with the ball, and we know this Green Bay secondary isn't one of the best. They had to face a lot of injuries last year, which kind of puts them at a bit of a disadvantage going into the year. There's going to be some new faces, I believe, on secondary, but I think this game has such a high game total that it's worth targeting on both sides, Russ and Aaron Rodgers. Russ has that rushing upside. He has some great weapons in Doug Baldwin, Jimmy Graham.
And some bad running backs. Banged up running backs, yeah.
I don't know. He has the narrative game going with Eddie Lacy. Who knows how that will pan out.
Did he make weight?
Yeah, he will be one of the few active running backs week 1, I believe, him and Chris Carson. But I think Russ is still in play. I really do.
All right, so I have another question for you. Ben Roethlisberger is against the Browns, and it sounds like he is expensive, but it sounds like he's not going to be one of the top 3, top 5 most owned quarterbacks. If he was at home and not on the road, how much Ben Roethlisberger would you want?
That's interesting. If he were at home against the Browns week 1 with Antonio Brown, Martavis Bryant, Le'Veon Bell, I think that's one of those games where you go the heavy 4 stack and just load up on Steelers. The home away splits with Big Ben are widely publicized, but for good reason. They're pretty stark contrasts. I don't know. I'm not terribly into Big Ben, mostly because of the price, though, not the matchup or him being away. It's that he's priced so high.
Right. I mean, he is expensive, but the way I'm thinking about it is, like, obviously we know the home-road splits are bad. In his last 20 home games, he has 58 touchdowns, 19 interceptions. Last 20 away games, 19 touchdowns, 19 interceptions. Over the stretch, he ranks 5th worst in road passer rating and best in home passer rating. These are crazy splits over a large sample, but I wonder if the home-away splits matter in week 1 because, he's had months to prepare for this game. I don't know. Are they in Cleveland right now practicing? I don't know. But and the high price should keep ownership low, and maybe the home away splits don't really matter early on in the season or week 1 especially. I'm not sure, but it's something to consider because it is a good matchup. What about Matt Ryan? Because Vegas at least to start was all over Ryan this week. I wasn't really on it just because he really is due for a massive decline in efficiency, and that was before losing offensive play caller Kyle Shanahan. And I've heard some people in DFS circles mention him as a sneaky contrarian play. I'm not really on it, but maybe you could sell me. What do you think? Are you on it?
No, not at all. I just think there's so many great quarterback options we're not dealing with any bye weeks or anything. I just don't think there's a real need to pay up at the position for a quarterback you don't really believe in. The Bears' pass defense was pretty solid last year. They only allowed 22 passing touchdowns. They didn't allow a ton of fantasy points. I think they were outside the top 10. They were in the bottom half, granted, but this game also is projected to be quite slow, and it's not something I want a ton of exposure to. Both these offenses play pretty slowly. They both rely on the run. I don't think there's a great avenue for Matt Ryan to just go off and hit well beyond 3x value. And if I'm paying, what is he? I think he's like QB 5 or 6 on the slate. It's $6,900. I'd rather pay another $100 and get Aaron Rodgers, or save $100 and play Mariota. That's my thought. I'm just not that into Ryan at $6,900.
Is there another quarterback we should be looking at?
I think there's some cheaper options that definitely draw my interest. One of them being Carson Wentz. He's down at $5,300, which just looks like a pricing gaffe. But another guy I'm interested in is Carson Palmer at $6K. He's priced in the bargain bin as well to start the season after his atrocious 2016. But I think people are quick to forget just how dominant he was in 2015. His weapons are almost all going to be in plus matchups, which is great. We're going to have Larry Fitzgerald out of the slot against one of our worst ranked cornerbacks in Quandre Diggs. Diggs was absolutely atrocious, finishing bottom 5 in both QB rating allowed and yards allowed per snap and coverage. Palmer will also be getting back a healthy John Brown, who should be coming back after this quad injury he faced most of the summer. Brown caught 2 of 2 passes in his only preseason action for 49 yards and 2 touchdowns. I like that a lot with Brown. I like Palmer, given that he's got his 2 main receiving weapons and David Johnson out of the backfield to throw to. I think they're all going to be in plus matchups, which makes Palmer a viable play.
Yeah, so you said he was atrocious last season, and he was atrocious in the first half of the season, but actually over the second half, from weeks 8 to 17, he was our 5th highest rated quarterback, ahead of guys like Andrew Luck, Russell Wilson, Drew Brees. So he really just struggled in that first half, but he definitely didn't look good, at least compared to the prior season where he put together a season that graded out as one of our 3 best of the past decade in terms of yards per dropback, top 3 best of the past decade. If he's anything like he was 2 years ago, or even over the second half of last season, I agree he looks like a great option. I'm also kind of on Tyrod Taylor and cash. We've talked about before about how mobile quarterbacks are really likely to hit 3x value on these sites, especially on DraftKings. Beyond that, Vegas just thinks they absolutely smashed the Jets. High implied point total. They're at home. They're heavily favored. And I think this is a good segue into running backs because I like the idea of pairing Tyrod Taylor with LeSean McCoy to ideally, barring some Tolbert vulture touchdowns that could ruin my day, I like the idea of getting all the touchdowns in this game. And, they cut Jonathan Williams, so I don't see Joe Banyard or Tywan Jones stealing any sort of work. The Jets were considered something of a funnel defense last year, but I don't really see that being a concern. They lost Sheldon Richardson, Deion Simons, Jarvis Jenkins in the offseason, and those were the number 2, number 3, and number 5 highest rated run defenders for the Jets last year. Also, all offseason beat writers, Rick Dennison, McCoy himself have been talking about how he's going to see a much larger role in the passing game this year. Plenty of positive game script. They're favored by 9.5. This is probably the best matchup they'll get all year until they face the Jets 9 weeks from now. McCoy gets back his entire offensive line and a capable blocking fullback. I don't know. Dream matchup. He's amazing. Put together the 25th best season in terms of yards per carry all time among all running backs, at least 200 carries in a single season. He's good. He's hyper efficient. Great matchup. Apparently, he's not going to be super highly owned. I don't buy that. I think he is. I think he's a chalk, but I think he's the chalk for good reason.
I agree. He's a complete smash play here versus the Jets. They're huge home favorites. The Bills have a terrific offensive line, allowing the most yards before contact, and they just added that stud fullback Patrick DeMarco, like you referenced. Sign me up, man. Shady has legit 25 carry upside with a few receptions involved. I think he's a great play. I think you're diving too far into it if you're trying to fade Shady. I'm trying to look at the other two running backs, LeVeon Bell and David Johnson. Which way are you leaning there?
So I started off way on LeVeon Bell. It's just the much better matchup. And I've been coming off of it just on recent news that they might sort of ease him in. He literally just reported to camp less than a week ago. And they're talking about giving James Conner some play in this game. And the reason we love LeVeon Bell, or one of the reasons, is because he sees this immense usage that no one else comes close to. He's playing like 92% of the snaps, 98% of the carries, 95% of the targets, when the next closest running back, who is David Johnson, was seeing like 77% of the snaps, 80% of the carries, and 80% of the running back targets. But this offseason, Bruce Arians has been talking about getting David Johnson to 30 touches per game, and he's mentioned that multiple times this offseason. If it was week 2, I might feel differently, but with the holdout lasting so long, I'm kind of leaving DJ. What about you, Tyler?
I'm there with you on DJ. With Le'Veon going against the Browns, I think it's going to draw a ton of ownership. And anytime we can get DJ at even the slightest inkling of depressed ownership, we have to take advantage of that. He led the league in fantasy points, touches, touchdowns, missed tackles, and just about every other category you could dream of. David Johnson's a smash play. I like him even more because you're saving money on Le'Veon. The Lions were also just terrible in space. They allowed the 8th most receptions to the position, and I think he has a great chance at hitting 30 touches in this one.
Yo, we need to stop agreeing so much. Maybe this one you'll disagree with, because I think it's somewhat controversial. Dalvin Cook, he's super cheap on DraftKings, and I think he's going to see a lot of targets. He led all preseason running backs in targets per snap this preseason. All offseason, I've talked about how I thought he was a superior prospect to Leonard Fournette, at least statistically, in terms of production. My only concern was pass protection. He ranked 5th worst in pass blocking efficiency last season, but the team says that's no longer a concern at all. They have full faith in him as a pass blocker. Pat Shurmur is another guy I talked about a lot in my play caller tendencies articles. Historically massive workload for his lead running backs. Vegas thinks Minnesota wins, or at least keeps things close, as they're favored by 3.5. The Saints are starting 2 rookies in their front 7, with 3 players grading out as poor and only defensive end. Cameron Jordan grading out above average. They allowed the 3rd most fantasy points per game to running backs last season. I think there's a chance Latavius Murray vultures touchdowns, but I don't care. He's super cheap. I don't see him being this cheap ever again this season, and I think he's a fantastic play. Do you disagree?
My first couple words were, I love this spot for Cook. So no, sorry.
Damn.
We're on the same page. One thing that is interesting, the thing you brought up with Latavius, is the Saints allowed the 2nd most touchdowns to the running back position last year. So Latavius has a very good shot at coming in and vulturing one of those, capping Cook's upside. One interesting thing is the Vikings were right in the middle of the pack, though, when it came to red zone play calling, pass and run splits. So they don't really lean one way or the other, despite the offensive line not being that much of a powerhouse. I think Cook's still a great play given his price. And as you mentioned, the Saints give up the 3rd most fantasy points to the position. It's worth pursuing, especially if you're playing that Monday slate.
Great points, Tyler. Who's another running back you got for me?
Carlos Hyde. Kyle Shanahan
Yes.
is no stranger to feeding his running backs touches, and it wouldn't shock me at all to see Hyde surpass that 20-touch mark in Week 1. Hyde averaged 18.8 touches over the 13 games he played last year. finishing as the RB12 in fantasy points per game and one of the least efficient offenses in the league. If he can overcome that terrible offense that we saw last year with Chip Kelly running the ship, I believe that we could see Hyde in for a big bounce back. Hyde finished 8th in yards after contact per attempt, a great stat that we have at PFF that separates a running back's play from the offensive line. He had that at 3.07. He also forced the 10th most missed tackles. He's priced at just $4,800, and he's in cash game consideration for me. What do you think about him in cash?
Yeah, typically on DraftKings, I'd be concerned about Hyde because, he doesn't catch passes. But wait, doesn't he? Or was that just last season? You and me, I know we definitely agree on this. We think Kyle Shanahan is a genius, mastermind, infallible, and I have full faith he uses Carlos Hyde as the featured all-purpose back he was this preseason. I mean, Kyle Juszczyk could come in, steal some targets for sure, but I actually think he has a much higher target upside this season than last. I think he's going to be more efficient this season than last year. Every time Kyle Shanahan was brought into a new offense, teams saw an increase in running back yards per carry. It was by a significant margin. I think on average, like 0.3 yards per carry better, or even more than that. So yeah, just super excited about Hyde in general. I get, they're not going to be a good team this year, but the touches should be there, volume should be there, and just a brilliant offensive play caller should design some cool plays for Hyde. Yeah.
Yeah, and they also got rid of Tim Hightower too, which I think was a big move. He was a big receiving back last year. I think Hyde is in line to get all that receiving work early in the year. They did a ton of surprising cuts, and some of that was due to injury, some of it was due to ineffectiveness. But I really like what Shanahan has as far as this offense and what we could see in week 1, especially against the Panthers. I think it's a 48-point game total right now. We should see it back and forth, and I'm expecting Hyde to stay relevant even if they are in some negative game script.
All right. What about at the wide receiver position this week? We already talked about Larry Fitzgerald as the uber mega chalk, and now with Mike Clay's wide receiver versus cornerback matchup article coming out with our wide receiver versus cornerback chart coming out, people realize, brilliant matchup versus Quandre Diggs, who was terrible last season. Detroit allowed the most fantasy points per game to opposing slot wide receivers last year. What about a name or two that we might not be familiar with?
Well, one big change was the Tennessee Titans getting Logan Ryan as a corner. He'll probably be spending most of his time against Amari Cooper. This game is the second highest total of the week, and I'm expecting a ton of touchdowns, even for the red zone deficient Cooper. Last year, Cooper led the league with the most missed end zone touchdown opportunities. What I mean by that is defensive backs interfered or held or whatever to get in the way of Cooper and the ball coming to him, drawing a penalty flag 4 different times, robbing him of 4 different scores. That was the most in the league. I think if Cooper develops his my ball mentality or gains a little more physical toughness, we've heard he added some weight this year trying to bulk up. If Cooper's able to buck this trend of poor red zone efficiency, I think he could be in for a massive season. And it starts week 1 here with the Titans. The Titans allowed the second most fantasy points to opposing wideouts last year. And Cooper draws Ryan, who we mentioned. Ryan wasn't that great last year. He gave up 68% catch rate to opposing wide receivers. I think this is a great game to be game stacking from a game theory perspective with a ton of Raiders and Titans. Are you into any of those plays on the receiver position?
I mean, yeah, man. Dude, I'm totally with you on game stacking this game as well as Packers, Seahawks. I mean, they are the 2 highest totaled matchups of the week, so we're not getting cute here, and a lot of other people are going to be on it as well. But yeah, I mean, it just makes a lot of sense. Like I said, I like all 4 of these quarterbacks, and in most cases, it's pretty clear who the primary targets are going to be. Another guy that I'm on is Terrelle Pryor. He's the 16th highest priced wide receiver on DraftKings, but grossly mispriced on FanDuel as the 43rd highest priced wide receiver. So out of 116 qualifying cornerbacks last season, Philadelphia's starting outside cornerbacks Ronald Darby and Jalen Mills graded out 90th and 116th in coverage last season. 27.6% of the Eagles' receiving fantasy points allowed came on deep passes last season, which ranked highest in the league. I could see Pryor, using his really elite speed in terms of weight-adjusted 40 time. He ranks only behind Calvin Johnson, and the person behind him is Julio Jones. That's if he ran his Pro Day 40 at the Combine. And this is since 2011. So I could see him, being used as this deep threat with Deshaun Jackson now in Tampa Bay. He's just grossly mispriced. He should see a lot of targets, a lot of high-value targets as well. So I'm pretty excited about him. Anyone else on your side, Tyler?
I think that's actually pretty interesting with Pryor. I think he's a great option to attack this Philadelphia Eagles defense. I am completely fading Jordan Reed, who the Eagles have historically shut down. They gave him one monster, I think it was a 35-plus point week in 2015, but they've held Jordan Reed to under 10 points in 5 games, aside from that 6th one. That was crazy. So I think the way for teams to attack the Eagles is via the perimeter with Terrelle Pryor and a guy of that size. Another guy that I'm kind of interested at the wide receiver position is, well, if I'm looking to pay up, let's just start there. I'll go with AJ Green. Green has absolutely smashed when lining up against Jimmy Smith. Looking back at 2015 when they were both healthy, Green put up 14 catches, 261 yards, and 3 touchdowns in his 2 matches against them. Green ran 78% of his routes from the outside last year, bouncing back left and right, not really working in the slot, mostly as a perimeter wide receiver. And he should get plenty of work against Jimmy Smith again this year. He's one of the few stud wide receivers that I don't think comes with any warts, and he should draw decent ownership as such. To counter that, I'll probably be going overboard with my exposure to Green compared to the field. He ranked 2nd in yards per route run last year, 7th in wide receiver rating, and he led the league in fantasy points per game, excluding his 2-snap game he had in Week 11. The guy's just a stud, and I don't know. I think this is just a great matchup for him. I think he's the stud for me that's worth paying up for.
Yeah, I'm absolutely with you, and it was absurd how much Andy Dalton targeted him this preseason. Dalton had 28 attempts, and 13 of those were directed at AJ Green. That led all quarterback to receiver connections this preseason. Yeah, he's in a good spot.
Yeah, it's one of the few plays in that game because I'm not really that intrigued by the Cincinnati-Baltimore game outside of AJ Green.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you. I think Jeremy Maclin and Mike Wallace could see enough targets with Perriman questionable and their tight end situation a mess, but they're definitely not guys I'm uber excited about. If we want to talk about cheap, they are cheap on FanDuel. If we want to talk about cheap wide receivers, a few guys immediately come to mind that are gaining some buzz. So I'm just going to list them off real quick, all right? Kendall Wright, Robbie Anderson, Paul Richardson, Cooper Kupp, Zay Jones, Marquise Goodwin. Who do you want to talk about first?
Wow. Yeah, those are punts. Okay, these are all guys you can get for under 4K on DraftKings. The guy that I'm super interested in is Marquise Goodwin at 3,200. I don't know who on earth gave Kyle Shanahan an Olympic athlete to game plan around, but I want to kiss him because that was a great plan. Goodwin's going to go off. I think he has a great chance to be one of those 40 yards for a touchdown kind of plays and just completely pay off his 3.2K salary on DraftKings. I'm super into this 49ers-Panthers game, as we alluded to earlier. Cam Newton's a guy that I'll be playing heavily. I'll have some Brian Hoyer exposure, and I'll be stacking the heck out of it with the wide receivers and running backs on both sides. Goodwin's definitely in play for me there. What kind of punts are you looking at?
Yeah, I don't really think these guys are definitely punts. I think a lot of them are just solid salary relief options. We know Jared Goff had this ridiculous connection to with Cooper Kupp this preseason. 8 of his 30 targets were directed at Kupp. Those low ADOT targets. That's kind of how he played last year, arguably a better fit than Watkins. That said, he's not the guy I'm on. Robbie Anderson, definitely more of a punt GPP play. I am not on him. I've heard a lot of big names talk about him. He was one of our 10 worst rated wide receivers last season out of over 115 qualifying. And he really did nothing outside of a few games with Bryce Petty. I don't know if he had some pictures of Petty in a compromising position or what, but it was just ridiculous how he was averaging like 380 air yards per game and just did nothing else outside of games Petty played in. Not on him. I want to see what he does with McCown first. Paul Richardson, I think, is somewhat intriguing. I mean, I love Doug Baldwin, but something not a lot of people are mentioning is that Green Bay allowed the most fantasy points per game to outside wide receivers last season, but were average to slot wide receivers. They gave up only the 16th most, and Doug Baldwin runs a high percentage of his routes from the slot. It's where he spends the majority of his time. Kendall Wright, I am pretty excited about. So Falcons slot corner Brian Poole is good, but somehow the Falcons still allow the third most fantasy points per game to opposing slot wide receivers last year. We know the Dowell Loggins connection in 2013, last time they played together, or the only time they played together. He had career highs in targets, 139, receiving yards, 1,079. Chicago has 191 targets unaccounted for, with Cameron Meredith gone, Alshon Jeffrey gone. Plenty of negative game script. Atlanta's favored by 7. They should go pass heavy. Desmond Trufant was our 6th, 10th, and 20th highest graded cornerback over the past 3 seasons. Will be shadowing Kevin White. So I see a lot of targets funneled in his direction. I think he's really solid play in DraftKings cash or GPPs if you need that salary relief. Zay Jones, I think, is interesting as well. He set the Division I record in receptions last year with 158. That's 21 more than the next closest receiver. Guy has beautiful hands. He never drops passes. The Jets are bad. The Bills are projected to smash. Jordan Matthews is going to be limited. Sammy Watkins is in Los Angeles. Anquan Bolden's retired. The team has just talked up this guy nonstop since they drafted him. I think he's in play as well. I think Wright's probably my favorite of this cheap group. But all those guys are kind of in play.
No, I agree with you completely. I think Wright's the play for the punts and cash. The rest of the guys you just want to sprinkle in tournaments. We don't want to go overweight here with these guys where we're still trying to learn their roles in these offenses and how the whole 2017 season will play out. As much as we think we know what's going to happen, we don't know anything, and there's still a lot that could change. Moving on here, though, let's check out the tight end position. There's a lot of really good plays and a lot of mediocre ones. I don't think there's too many poor plays, though. Is there anybody that really draws your attention and jumps out on the page when you first open DraftKings or FanDuel?
Yeah, honestly, not really at all.
Oh, okay. There's our disagreement. Okay.
Yeah.
I think there's some smash plays here at the tight end position.
Let's hear it.
Delaney Walker first of all.
Yeah. All right.
It wasn't that long ago that we were heavily targeting Oakland as the weakest team against tight ends, and it was like a must-target game. We should see that again, I think, early in the year with injuries to all the linebacking core and their safeties they have. Oakland allowed the 4th most receiving yards and 11th most receptions to opposing tight ends last year. The Titans are implied for 26.5 points this week. That's 5th highest in the league. Team total has one of the highest correlations to fantasy points at the tight end position, making Delaney a great target for this week in this shootout. We've been talking about this Titans-Raiders game so many times because there's just great plays all across the board. Delaney's one of them as well. That's all I got to say. There's a couple other tight end positions that or tight end selections here that I think are in really good spots. I think Zach Ertz could be the chalk this week. DK priced him at just 3,500, and he stands to be the biggest beneficiary of the Jordan Matthews Buffalo Bills trade. He should be inheriting all those short to intermediate targets, and he draws a pretty favorable matchup against Washington.
So where do you stand on Nelson Aguilar? Because I think that's what it comes down to.
I think he is one of PFF's lowest graded wide receivers for a reason.
Not just one of them. He was the literal lowest graded wide receiver in each of the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, he's one of those, you're going to need to prove it to me before I ever roster you. I can't get behind that. I think Ertz is going to stand and inherit all those targets that J-Nat leaves behind. He's got that rapport with Carson Wentz. We know that Zach Ertz has some incredible December splits versus the rest of the season. Hopefully that will change this year with the departure of J-Matt. Maybe Ertz gets those intermediate targets on a much more frequent basis and not just in the end of the year. Are there any tight ends that you're interested in, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, Delaney Walker's definitely high on the list. I like Jason Witten on DraftKings more than FanDuel, but I do like his upside this week. That's kind of how you beat the Giants. Their cornerbacks are just so good. You're really left with not much else besides targeting the tight end. 25% of the Giants' receiving fantasy points allowed went to the tight end position last year. That ranked 5th highest. In week 1 against the Cowboys last year, he had 13 targets, which I think was the most he's seen since 2013. So yeah, he's in a good spot. He was also our highest graded tight end this preseason at 59 and a half years of age. But yeah, so I like him a little bit this week. What about Charles Clay? He's apparently the chalk this week, as if everyone's forgetting that he's Charles Clay. What do you think about that?
No, I can't get behind Charles Clay whatsoever. That's just not a play that I'll ever pursue. I don't think he has much of a high ceiling. I don't think they have a great shot at a ton of touchdowns, and he's just not somebody that I'm ever excited to play. If you're looking to punt, I think you could go better with like Austin Hooper against the Bears. Hooper's just 3K on DraftKings, and that game has a pretty high total as well. I don't know. I'm just not that into the ancillary plays of the Bills. I'd rather just focus on Shady, and that's about it.
Yeah, right. All right. I'm with you. I feel like we should talk about the Thursday night game because we didn't talk about it too much.
Yeah, okay, let's dive into it. What are you thinking about the Patriots?
Dude, I kind of think that everyone just absolutely smashes. One or two or three or four or five running backs is going to score a ton of points. I really don't want to gamble with money on who that's going to be because I just genuinely do not have any clue whatsoever. Rob Gronkowski had a monster 2-touchdown game last time he went off against the Kansas City Chiefs. He was covered primarily by Eric Berry, but still had a big day. Chiefs are a tough opponent for sure against opposing tight ends. Over the past 7 seasons, they've ranked top 7 in fantasy points allowed to tight ends. So they've been very stout there. It doesn't matter. It's Rob Gronkowski. Brandon Cooks is Tom Brady's shiny new toy. I could see him doing some exciting stuff. But the guy I'm really, really excited about is Chris Hogan. So he was Brady's favorite target this preseason, drawing 6 targets on 23 attempts. Julian Edelman was next closest with 4. He's projected to run the majority of his slots. He's projected to run a high percentage of his routes from the slot with Edelman out. Chiefs are without their slot cornerback Steve Nelson this week, which means Phillip Gaines is going back to the slot, which means you need to roster Chris Hogan and throw a party and do a dance because Gaines allowed the 5th most fantasy points per route in coverage last season among 101 qualifying cornerbacks. The last time he played more than 13 snaps in a single game, he allowed 209 yards into his coverage in one game. That was the fifth most any quarterback has surrendered in one game this past decade. Hogan blew up in a ton of my stats over the offseason, put together a top 5 season this past decade in terms of depth-adjusted yards per target. Vegas is projecting New England drops 29 points on the Chiefs. That's the highest implied point total of the week. Just I think everyone smashes. Unfortunately, ownership is going to be massive on everyone, on Brady, on Gronk, on Cooks. I think you might get lucky with Hogan at a low price and a lower than otherwise should be ownership percentage. So I'm on him. What do you think about that, and who are you on the Chiefs side of the ball?
I love it. I think the play that I'm going to do is fading this game by and large for the most part with a sprinkling of naked Brady, where I just want him by himself without any of his receivers. Because, like you said, he could throw 2 to Gronk, 1 to Amendola, 1 to Hogan, 1 to Rex Burkhead. It could be all over the map, and I'll just take those 5 touchdowns with Brady and call it a day. Hogan's a great play, though. I am very into him as well. I think he's going to be a great play all season long, and he's just blown up the last month following the injury to Julian Edelman. From the Chiefs' perspective, there aren't a lot of really good plays here. Alex Smith has shown over the course of his career that he's consistently afraid to throw the ball downfield. Last year, he finished 35th out of 36 qualifying quarterbacks in ADOT. I'm quite content letting others try to think that's a smart play to try and get garbage time against the Patriots. Rookie Kareem Hunt is someone I'm super excited for this year, but he just has a tough week 1 matchup where I don't think he'll have a ton of game script on his side. He might be able to get some receptions in garbage time. We know that Smith loves to check down, and Hunt finished his final year at Toledo with 41 receptions. But I think he's more of a sprinkle-in type of play if you're really eager to play any kinds of Chiefs. Tyreek Hill is always the GPP guy to target, but I don't know. Belichick's defenses are pretty disciplined. They don't allow the big splash plays. In fact, they were bottom 6 in 30-plus yard pass plays allowed last year. I think it was 5 of Tyreek Hill's 9 touchdowns were over 30 yards in distance. So he's already taken out Hill's biggest asset, which is his breakaway speed. And the Patriots don't break down in the red zone, allowing the top 12 lowest red zone touchdown conversion rate. So they'll let the guys into the red zone, but they won't let them score for touchdowns. They'll settle for field goals. And we know that Bill Belichick likes to take away the opposing team's best weapon, and I think that's Travis Kelce. He'll find ways, like their corners are good enough where I think they can keep Tyreek Hill in check. I think that they can afford to double Kelce and take him out of the game. Kelce had just 7 targets inside the opponent's 10-yard line last year, and he had just a 3.4% touchdown rate. I'm not really that eager into trying to load up and get cute with Kelce. I think the play from this Thursday night game is a little bit of Brady, some Hogan, and then a sprinkling here and there of other guys if you're so inclined. I will not be. It's mostly Brady for me, though.
All right, you heard it here first, folks. This should be your week 1 strategy. Hopefully you have a monster week and you tweet at myself or Tyler your monstrous winnings, and then we could retweet them and gain more listeners for the podcast, and you could gain more followers on Twitter and live happily ever after. For the record, I need it stated, Deshaun Jackson would have gone nuts on the Miami Dolphins secondary this week. Wish I could have talked about it. Fortunately, Hurricane had to make me delete that from my articles this week. Tyler, this was fun, as always, and informative. And why don't you tell the wonderful people at home where they can find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Tyler Buecher, Buecher.
And you can find me at Scott Barrett, DFB. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Really appreciate it. See y'all next week.